The drama surrounding one of boxing's most anticipated welterweight clashes had been building for months before Jaron Ennis finally stepped into the ring to face the battle-hardened Sergey Lipinets. This was not just another fight on a card, this was a statement bout, a crossroads moment that would either validate Ennis as the real deal or expose him as nothing more than carefully cultivated hype. The boxing world was watching, the stakes were impossibly high, and what unfolded over those rounds would leave no one in any doubt about what kind of fighter Jaron Ennis truly was. Lipinets came into this contest with serious credentials. A former world champion at 140 pounds, the Kazakhstani warrior had made the move up to welterweight with his eyes set on causing one of the year's biggest upsets. He had seen lefties before, beaten lefties before, and those inside the sport knew that his aggressive, pressure-heavy style made him dangerous against any southpaw who wasn't careful. His two notable victories against left-handed opponents gave his corner genuine confidence, and there was a very real belief in his camp that Jaron Ennis, for all his brilliance, could be cracked. All they needed to do was get inside, apply the pressure, and turn this into the kind of ugly, grinding war that champions are made in. But from the very first bell, it became clear that Jaron Ennis was not going to make things easy for anyone. Working under the respected trainer Joe Goosen, who had spent months instilling in his fighter a mastery of the short game, Ennis came out disciplined, composed, and devastatingly intelligent. He relied heavily on his jab in the opening moments, not a lazy range-finding jab, but a sharp, authoritative weapon used to establish distance and dictate the entire pace of the bout. Corner advice flowing freely between rounds had been consistent. Dominate the jab, control range, make Lipinets fight your fight, not his own. What made Ennis so uniquely difficult to prepare for was something that became apparent almost immediately in round one. He was fighting out of a southpaw stance, but he wasn't locked into it. He moved fluidly between orthodox and southpaw positions, shifting his weight and angles with a naturalness that most fighters never develop in an entire career. The commentators noted it with genuine admiration. He was dynamic from either side, throwing with authority, whether leading with his left or his right, and critically, he lost none of his power in transition. That kind of versatility is extraordinarily rare at the professional level, and it immediately created problems for Lipinets, who had studied southpaw tendencies and arrived with a game plan that Ennis was quietly dismantling with every passing minute. By the middle of the opening rounds, Ennis was operating at long range with masterful efficiency. He kept Lipinets at the end of his punches, using his footwork to stay just outside the danger zone while consistently landing clean shots that accumulated both in punch stats and in the minds of the judges. He was patient, a word often thrown around boxing commentary but rarely demonstrated in practice at this level. This patience was intentional, coached, developed. Goosen had spoken beforehand about his fighter's ability to read the moment, to resist the temptation of forcing the action, and what was unfolding in those early rounds was a textbook demonstration of that philosophy. Ennis was waiting, watching, setting traps while Lipinets walked forward, convinced that persistence would eventually reward him. The body work from Ennis was particularly striking throughout the fight. He drove brutal shots downstairs with regularity, mixing them seamlessly into his combinations so that Lipinets could never settle into a defensive rhythm. A straight left hand to the body that landed cleanly around the middle rounds drew audible appreciation, not just for its power, but for its timing and placement, slipped in precisely as Lipinets thought he had navigated his way to safer ground on the inside. That is the hallmark of a truly exceptional fighter. Not just the ability to throw good punches, but the intelligence to throw them when the opponent least expects it. As the commentary team noted, it is always the punch you don't see that hurts you most, and Ennis was becoming a master of invisible offense. Lipinets, to his enormous credit, was not broken easily. That is the mark of a man who has operated at world championship level. He absorbed punishment, reset, and kept pressing forward with the kind of stubborn courage that has defined his career. He found moments on the inside where he was able to land, particularly with the right hand, and there were brief passages in the middle rounds where he seemed to be making inroads, his shorter combinations catching Ennis in pockets. The question that hung over these moments was one of power. Lipinets had been a 140-pound champion, and the welterweight class carries a different weight, literally and figuratively. Could he hurt Ennis? Could he slow the machine down? For a brief, tantalizing stretch, it seemed like a legitimate possibility. By round 4, however, Jaron Ennis delivered his definitive answer to every question that had ever been asked about his credentials. The moment arrived with the kind of suddenness that only the very best punchers in boxing can manufacture. A left uppercut, short, tight, thrown from angles that gave Lipinets absolutely no time to process its arrival, landed flush, and the Kazakhstani champion went down for only the second time in his entire professional career. The first had come against Mikey Garcia back in March of 2018, a night when the elite of the sport had exposed Lipinets against the very highest level. And here, in this fight, Ennis was joining that company in the most emphatic fashion imaginable. The crowd erupted, the corner erupted, and the boxing world watching at home got the confirmation they had been waiting for. What was remarkable about the knockdown was not merely its power, but its execution. The left uppercut came through a gap in Lipinets' guard that had been carefully created over the preceding rounds. All that patient jabbing, all that body work, all those feints and switches of stance, they had been building towards this single devastating moment. That is how elite fighters operate. They don't just throw punches, they construct a narrative inside the ring, chapter by chapter, and then deliver the climax with perfect, brutal precision. Ennis had been writing this story since round 1, and the knockdown in round 4 was its inevitable conclusion taking shape. Lipinets, shaken but not finished, rose to his feet and tried to weather the storm that followed. Ennis came in, hungry but controlled, another indicator of a fighter operating on a high level. There's always the temptation after a knockdown to abandon everything and go for the finish recklessly, and fighters with lesser discipline routinely make that mistake and get countered in the process. Ennis did not make that mistake. He remained structured, kept his defense tight, and continued